Hey guys, I've been studying all day. You guys seem to enjoy the systems classes, so by talking to you, I reinforce it for myself. So here we go. We'll talk about the fuel system real quick. Fairly straightforward. You can tell there are four rotary knobs. The top one is the crossfeed, the middle one is the DC pump, and the bottom two are the AC electric pumps. All right? So the way this works is there are 7 fuel pumps on this airplane, and they are the DC electric pump, which feeds off the right tank because the APU feeds off the right tank. And it only has one function in life, and that's when you battery start the auxiliary power unit to provide fuel pressure to it. That's it. It doesn't back up any of the other pumps. So you come into a cold airplane, start the APU from the battery. Remember that number 2 battery switch goes over the start bus to start the APU. Turns on the DC pump, provides fuel, fires up. Once that generator's online and AC power comes on, that pump goes back to sleep. That's all it does. And the other 6 pumps, you have an AC electric on each side, you have an injector pump in each system on each side, and you have an engine-driven pump on each engine. Okay, so basically mirror images of each other. And you cannot transfer fuel from one side to the other, but you can cross-feed. So the times that the AC pumps are the ones with logic, because the engine-driven pumps, like your car, they're just going when the engine's going, and when the fuel is flowing, those ejector pumps are helping push the fuel along. But the AC pumps actually have an operational logic to them, and pretty straightforward. If they sense a low fuel pressure, of course, they'll kick on. They're going to kick on when you do a fuel cross-feed, but also you figure you go up to a cold airplane, even if it's got power on it, AC power, you want to start the engine. Even with the APU going, well, that's great. The APU provides the air source and the electricity, but we got to get fuel into the engine. But since the ejector pump and the engine-driven pump only work, once the engine's up and going, you got to have a way to get fuel. So the AC pumps kick on for engine start. Then once everything's stabilized and the engine doesn't need it, it can go to sleep, but it's still on guard. Of course, if there is a low fuel pressure, it'll kick on to compensate. The other time it comes on is if you're doing cross-feed. Now this airplane, you have to keep the fuel balanced within 800 pounds. That's the maximum. You're allowed to be heavy on one side, and you don't want to get that heavy. So if you happen to look down, oh look, the right tank, number 2, is a little low, and the left tank, number 1, is a little high. There's a 500-pound spread. Let's balance that out. So I reach up to that cross-feed switch, and I go over to low 2. Always point towards the low tank. Well, that will kick on the AC electric pump on the heavy side, on side 1, and that'll help push fuel up to the system. So both engines will be feeding off that one tank until it works its way down to level, which doesn't take very long, and then cross-feed off. Simple as that. So you know that the electric AC fuel pumps are going to kick on, engine start, and cross-feed. And of course, the engine pumps are going when the engines are going, the ejector pumps are working when the fuel's flowing, and the DC pump works when you start the APU off the battery. A slightly similar sounding but very different system is the hydraulic system. Now the hydraulic system also has engine-driven pumps, and it has electric pumps. But as you can tell to look at it, it's a little bit more complicated. Those 2 red switches are shut-off valves. You push those in, the little white bar comes on, and it closes the valve and shuts the hydraulics off. The hydraulic pump off, isolates it. Now you have 3 systems, 1, 2, and 3. And in between those 2 red switches is a PTU, that's a power take-up. That really only has one real function in life. Hydraulic system 2 swings the gear up and down, and if there's a loss of pressure, such as an engine-driven pump failure or an engine failure, because of course if the engine fails, the pump's going to stop working, then that PTU allows it to pull power off of the number 1 system to make sure you have plenty of pressure for the gear swing. You don't want to be out there on one engine with the gear hanging down. It's all that PTU does. Again, it tends to live in auto, but it has an off, auto, and on function. So you can turn it on and leave it running. Both of the System 1 and System 2 pumps also have off, auto, and on. And again, they tend to stay in auto. System 3, if you look at the bottom 2 switches, they're on System 3. They do not have an engine-driven pump, and you'll also notice that one of those switches just says off and on. The other one's off on auto. Well, part of the parking checklist, the flow, is to turn that pump off, because if you forget, it's just going to sit there running at the gate. And one thing we do is when we're doing pushbacks, you realize the engines aren't going normally. Sometimes you're pushing back with an engine go, but generally speaking, you're pushing back on just the APU. So you have electric power and air and everything, but you really don't have much pressure in the brake system. So a lot of times we'll flip all those pumps on for the pushback, just in case like the tow bar should separate or something and we have to use the airplane brakes to stop. We've got something there. And it's a standard 3000 PSI system. So pretty straightforward stuff. And of course the three systems are completely independent, although you do have that power take up between 1 and 2, which can help. But unlike the fuel where you can feed both engines off of one tank, at no point do the hydraulic systems actually exchange the hydraulic fluid. So they're completely independent systems. Okay, well, that's about all there is for that. Oh, by the way, completely unrelated note. As I was taking a little break, I happened to notice my wife said, "Look at that!" And you remember a while back we talked about, because Aurora made the ABS plastic all-terrain vehicles from the banana splits, and they made them out of ABS plastic that you couldn't use regular glue on. Well, she found a 2019 movie called The Banana Splits, and it's the characters, Fleagle and Bingo, but the cover art shows them kind of sitting there cowering with Bingo up close to the camera with an axe. Like, I'm like, what have they done? Tra la 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 la. Model on.